All right. Hi, everybody. Kelsey here. I was feeling creatively inspired earlier today, and I wanted to make a little video to share with you all on my take on the parallels between the symbolism or the themes of Easter, which is the most important holiday in the Christian faiths, and what's going on in the world right now with coronavirus and COVID-19. So I want to begin by talking a little bit about Easter in case you're not familiar with this holiday, its symbolism, and kind of what it's all about. I always like to begin by saying Easter actually has astrological connections for people who didn't know that. The date of Easter, it's always on a Sunday, but it changes year to year. It's not like, for example, 4th of July. That's always on the 4th of July every single year. So Easter always falls on the first Sunday after the first full moon of the spring season. So I always think that's funny that something that's religious actually has astrological ties to it. This past Tuesday, April 7th, was the full moon in Libra, and that was the first full moon after the spring equinox. So therefore, this Sunday, April 12th, is Easter because it's the first Sunday after the first full moon of spring. So as I mentioned earlier, Easter is the most important holiday in the Christian tradition. And essentially, the story kind of goes that Jesus, a figure who we're all probably familiar with in some way, shape, or form, was, he was killed, he was crucified, he was buried, but then after a couple of days, they went to look for his body and it was no longer there. So the idea is that he was resurrected after his death and kind of ascended into heaven to take his place in eternal life, this idea of a new life after the physical human life. So really just kind of looking at the broader symbolism of this idea of new life and how it kind of applies to what's happening right now. I also think it's appropriate that Easter happens in the spring season because we start to see on the earth all around us signs of new life, right? During the spring season is when flowers start to bloom. Here in the Chicago area, I've been seeing some daffodils and other small little flowers around. It's when the trees start to flower or get buds on them, the leaves begin to grow. So it's definitely no coincidence that the holiday of Easter is celebrated also during the spring season when we see the reflection of this symbolism, this theme of new life happening in the world all around us. So kind of taking that idea, those themes of the Easter holiday and looking at what's happening right now with coronavirus, COVID-19. And I want to talk particularly about three different levels of impact, one being personal, the second being collective, and the third being the impact on the earth. But, it's always good to start with ourselves, so we're going to begin on the personal level. Most of us across the United States and definitely in the world and other countries as well are in isolation right now. There have been a lot of either mandatory or suggested shelter-in-place orders. We're being asked to quarantine ourselves. Certainly, if we know we've been exposed to the virus, and in a lot of places we're being asked to quarantine ourselves even if we're healthy and have not had any exposure, just to kind of reduce the exposure more broadly. So, what's really interesting is that a lot of people resist this idea of being isolated, of slowing down, of being out of the routine and the busyness of what happens in life. And I think as I've been reflecting on why this is for myself and for others, I have kind of come to this idea that, when everything stops, when you're out of the norm, when you have to sit with yourself in the quiet and the stillness and the non-distraction, that's when we are forced to kind of take a look at our fears, our anxieties, our loneliness, our grief, our, feelings of futility, our existential crises of like, who am I and what am I doing here and what is the point of my life? All those types of things. And I think it's really hard because when you slow down and you sit with those feelings, a lot of times you start to have these realizations. And they can be a whole range of different things. A realization from maybe the fact that you actually don't really have any hobbies. Like you go to work and you do your thing there and you run errands and you come home and you watch TV and that's it. So maybe you're realizing like, wow, I really don't have creative outlets or hobbies or other things that I'm passionate about. You might start to realize that, perhaps relationships that you were part of are actually not working for you anymore. It could be that a marriage is no longer satisfying and fulfilling. It could be friendships have run their course. It could be other types of relationships, perhaps in a work or career sense, really aren't filling a purpose or a need in your life at this point in time. It can be maybe something that you are really unhappy in your job. And when you're just kind of going through the day-to-day slog, you don't have to sit back and realize how unhappy you are. So maybe you're noticing it is time to make a shift in the work that you're doing. Perhaps you're realizing that you have not prioritized people and you've really let your connections with others slip in the busyness of life. Maybe it can be something about your health, like recognizing now that you're slowing down and sitting with yourself in a mental, emotional, and physical space more, like, wow, I really have let my health slide and I haven't made it a priority. So there can be all kinds of different realizations that come about when we're forced to sit by ourselves and look at the underlying reasons of why we're anxious, why we're fearful, why we feel despair, why we feel grief, all these different things that may come up. And again, I don't mean to say really happy, positive feelings could come up during this time as well. And if they are coming up for you, I'm super excited for you. But I think probably for the majority of people, they're being asked to sit with some of those more difficult or challenging feelings at this time. But so the reason I bring these things up is because, when we're in this stillness and we have these realizations about the job, the relationship, our health, our connections to others, whatever they may be, it's like your gut has always known those things all along. But when we're quiet enough that the mind can really listen to what the gut or what the intuition is saying, it's very hard because we have to acknowledge that consciously. And it's kind of one of those things where once you acknowledge something, you can't really unacknowledge it. You can't really unknow something that you already know, even though many times we wish we could. So, when we think of this idea of Easter being about a chance to resurrect ourselves and start a new life in some facet, in some fashion, I really want us to think about, with the knowings that have come up right now, about the things that are no longer working in our lives, about the things we may need to change, it can be really challenging, but this is the time, the spring season, the connection with the Easter symbolism of how can we make changes for the better? How can we start things that are new, that are going to serve us and those around us in a better way? And, trust me, beginning new facets of life is really, really hard for anyone, even people who totally love and embrace change. But, I feel for those of us for whom it feels completely overwhelming. So like my Scorpio friends, my Aquarius friends, my Taurus friends, my Leo friends, my Virgo friends, my Cancer friends, like those energies, if you are one of those signs or you have a strong concentration of any of those signs in your personal astrological chart, it can be very, very hard. Change is not something that comes easily. It's something that we feel very resistant to. And I am in the thick of it with all of you guys. I think definitely at the beginning of all of this, like quarantine, isolation, COVID stuff, I didn't want to get quiet. I didn't want to get still because there were things that I knew, but I didn't want to consciously know them. And kind of as I've been in this inner exploration over the last couple of weeks, I've really had to come to terms with some of those things, and it's been very difficult and it's been painful. If I'm being perfectly honest. So if you are struggling right now with any of those things, struggling with these inner knowings and how can you make changes in your life for the better, I feel you and I'm with you and I support you. The second way or connection that I wanted to make to this Easter symbolism of starting again, of new life, of resurrection, is looking kind of out of the personal sphere and into the collective sphere. So all of humanity. And so when we think about starting new life or starting a new way of living life, what's really interesting is that we have this energy of the planet Saturn moving into a new sign. Saturn's been in Capricorn for the last few years. It moved into Aquarius last month. So it's going to stay there till July, just like barely peeking its head into Aquarius. It'll go back into Capricorn for the second half of 2020, but then it'll go into Aquarius like full time all the way until the beginning of 2023. So we have a while that we're going to be seeing the symbolism and feeling the archetype of this energy, Saturn in Aquarius. So what's interesting is, Saturn can have different meanings. One of which, if we choose to look at the negative side, is that, Saturn can be an energy that restricts us and that limits us, and the energy of karma, like coming back to get us type of thing. And the sign of Aquarius is often connected to humanity at large, humanitarian efforts, to looking at the collective and what does the collective need. So I think, we are certainly seeing that in some way with, governments at the state level, the federal level, asking us to stay home, to close our businesses, to take actions that certainly have effects on us personally and greater ripple effects in the collective. And so I know a lot of people have been feeling really negative about that. However, there's also the flip side of that coin, where Saturn can represent the energy of the teacher, the energy of taking responsibility. And so I think we can frame it in that way, that we are being asked to take more responsibility for our part in what's happening to the world, to the collective. Take more responsibility for how we can be a positive support to the rest of humanity. And so, connecting with it, and I was just kind of sharing with you a minute ago that at the beginning of this shelter in place, this quarantine, this isolation, whatever you want to call it, it felt very, very bad to me. I was like, I want what I want, and I want it right now. I don't want to stay home. I don't want to not go out. Fuck you guys. You can't tell me what to do. I was very much sitting in that energy of resistance, for sure. Like, I personally am not that afraid of coronavirus, of getting COVID-19. I feel certain that I would recover, even if I were to contract this illness. I can make a whole nother video on how I feel that the fear and the panic has been way overdone connected to coronavirus. And that's something for a later time. Happy to discuss that with anyone at any point in time. However, what was interesting is that I noticed the further we got into this, the more days and weeks now that we've spent in this period of time, is that this was an invitation for me to step out of that view of me, mine, I, what I want, don't tell me what to do, I make my own decisions. I'm now being invited to step into a place of, how do my actions affect other people and everything else in the world? I mean, I personally believe that all things are interconnected on an energetic level, for sure. So if I truly believe that, then it was interesting for me to notice, like, okay, why was I so resistant then to taking an action that could potentially help others, even if it wasn't necessarily helpful in any particular way for me personally? So, when we think of this symbolism of Easter, again, of being born again, of resurrecting a new way of being, a new way of living, I think it'll be really interesting over the next couple of years for us to keep our eye on the ball of the collective, so to speak. Stay focused on the greater humanity and what actions can you take, or conversely, what actions can you not take in order to help be a more responsible citizen that is concerned for humanity at large, and not just the American ideal of me, myself, mine, and I. How can we turn that into a global, we're all interconnected, we as a whole, as a collective? And then the third way that I wanted to share, or third idea that I wanted to share thoughts on connected with Easter and COVID, is just this idea of how coronavirus is affecting the earth. And I mean like the literal physical earth, not the people on the earth. So what's really fascinating about this is I've been watching a lot of videos from some spiritual teachers that I admire and reading a lot of different things. And I've sort of come to this conclusion that the coronavirus is like a big old wake-up call from the earth herself, Mother Gaia. Earth certainly knows how to get our attention, whether it's with a pandemic like the coronavirus, whether it's with a major weather event, a major, earth event like earthquake. Thank you. I could not think of that word. Like an earthquake, a volcano exploding, etc. She makes her presence known. And I think this whole thing is kind of a greater consequence of how humans have utilized the earth in a way that is not sustainable. And this is the earth's way of being like, hey, hello, I need you to wake up and to listen, because this cannot go on forever. So when we think about Easter being a time of resurrection, I feel like this whole COVID thing is a resurrection for the physical earth around us. I keep seeing articles too about how, the air has never been this clean. There are parts of northern India that can finally see the Himalayan mountains that have always been, shrouded in pollution before. The waterways are much cleaner than they've ever been. There's less noise all around us with traffic and noise pollution. Personally, I feel that I've heard more birds chirping in the last 3 weeks than I heard in the last umpteen years. And, part of that could just be that I'm paying more attention. I'm moving slow enough to hear those things. Not necessarily that they weren't there before, but it is something interesting to note. So kind of the question is, as we move forward through coronavirus and out of this pandemic, how can we create a new life that is more sustainable on the whole? Because I gotta be honest, what we've been doing, it is not working, okay? And you might have different opinions on that, but that's my opinion. So, I want to put this question to you, that when eventually this isolation and this quarantine, this shelter in place is lifted and people start to come out of their homes again and back into their businesses and back into the spaces of travel and working more outside the home and collecting in groups outside the home, etc., just because things can go back to exactly the way they were before doesn't mean that they should go back to exactly the way they were before. And I would argue that the answer to that question is no. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something. So I want to encourage us to be thinking about a new life for the earth, a resurrection for the earth, and how can we sustain that? So thinking every single day about the impact that our choices make on the earth around us. And I hope you recognize, I am definitely using personal pronouns here. It's not things that you guys should be doing. It's things that we should be doing, I should be doing. Because, when I sit here in this quietness and this extra time that I have to reflect on my life, I do a lot of things that are pretty bad. I love to eat out. And on the one hand, it's great. Yay, support local business. But think about how much single-use plastic is being wasted every time I take food out from a restaurant. So I also want to encourage us to think bigger, though, because I feel like it doesn't have to be a choice between order food out and support a business, or don't order out at all and spend money, and therefore that business is losing your support. How can we look bigger and say, okay, why is it that the only way businesses can do takeout affordably is with all this crappy single-use plastic? Why is there no better sustainable option for them to use, and therefore me as a consumer to use? I feel like that's an interesting question. But going into all these, there's all these little things we can do. Another thing I'm really bad at, and I know it, is driving. I love driving. I drive everywhere, even when the weather is nice, even when I could walk or bike somewhere. And so now I want to think about, how can I make my life less busy so that I do have the time to walk somewhere, to bike somewhere, instead of hopping in my car and driving and creating all the extra, exhaust from my car. I think about, travel. I do think travel is important. I think it's really important to be exposed to new places, new cultures, new people. But maybe how can we start traveling in a way that's more sustainable? Or could we mitigate our travel a little bit? If you get invited to, let's say you get invited to 6 out-of-state weddings in one season, spring season, summer season, maybe you don't have to say yes to all those. Maybe you don't have to go to every single one, or whatever. I'm just giving ideas. This can look different for each and every one of us, but I just want to encourage us not to fall into this space of I'm too busy to consider how my actions affect others in the world. Instead, how can I continue to stay slow, continue to stay less busy even after coronavirus, so that I have the time to be thoughtful about how my actions will impact the earth and others around me. And if you fall into that category of person who's my single actions are too small, they don't make a difference in the collective, I really want to encourage you to step out of that thinking, because You just never know. You doing something more sustainable, maybe it's like thrift shopping for clothes instead of buying everything new. Maybe it's, reusing old t-shirts as cleaning rags so that you're not using paper towels or paper product, whatever it might be. You doing that and a friend seeing that, or you telling somebody about it, might inspire them to do something, and so on and so forth. So I really feel like even small actions can make a difference. And then also we can get involved in larger ways too. You can support legislation that protects the earth. You can use your own creativity and inventiveness to come up with new ways of doing business or new products or new things that can help us to live lives in a more sustainable fashion. So anyway, that was a lot of stuff that I'm saying, but I hope you've kind of enjoyed this take on looking at, tomorrow, Sunday, April 12th, being the holiday of Easter in the Christian faith, looking at the parallels between the symbolism of Easter being resurrection and new life, connected to what's happening in the world right now with coronavirus, COVID-19, on the personal level, on the collective level, on the physical earth level, and how we can kind of take these ideas of a new way of living, a new way of being, resurrecting in the earth sense, at least, and how can we kind of pay attention to those parallels that are happening right now, and how can we take this time in isolation, in shelter at home, to be more thoughtful and reflective about all of these ideas. So thank you guys so much for watching. As always, feel free to email me with any questions, kelsey@theastroyogi.com. You can also connect with me on Instagram. My Instagram name is _astro_yogi, and I would love to hear from you guys. So thanks, and have a great weekend.